reading aloud for you from my novella Goddess, Chapter 12. An icy gust of wind shivered through Madeleine's body, and she drew her coat a little closer around her middle and adjusted the thick woolen scarf around her neck. Yes, it was growing colder. She could tell. She glanced to one side, then looked away. A group of college girls approached. They bent their heads against the wind, their books and satchels clutched tightly against their bodies. No matter what we might be doing in our day-to-day lives, other people are going about their day-to-day lives too, and without a care or concern to the rest of the world. And this was one such example. While Madeleine and her sisters had been clearing out their mother's room, these young women had attended their classes. Perhaps they were on their way back to their dorms where they'd eat dinner, take their evening showers, and study together. Later in the evening, they might order pizza or go out on dates. They dipped their heads and laughed, their soft voices dancing away in the wind. I was once one of you. Madeleine envied them, not a little, and for all the obvious reasons, but also for the non-obvious ones. They were young, yes, and probably, yes, this was most likely true. Their mothers were still probably alive. Their fathers were still alive too, most likely, more likely than not. And yet, Madeleine knew better than to belittle their souls, for every human being experiences pain. And as Helen once so beautifully put it, we all have our secret sorrows. And one of those young women might be a cancer survivor, or may have already lost both her parents. Who knew? It did happen, after all. Terrible things didn't wait for people to be the right age to experience them. They simply happened. Madeleine had once been friendly with a young woman who worked for Children's Protective Services. Madeleine had bumped into Imogene one day at the YMCA in the locker room. And they talked to one another, and almost as if it were an afterthought, Imogene told Madeleine that when she was 21 years old, both her parents died within months of each other. And then I told him, Cassie was talking, filling Madeleine in on her mother's latest surgery, complaining of the doctor. It was difficult for Madeleine to concentrate, especially when she found herself paying more attention to her surroundings than to what her dear friend was saying. The young women rounded the fountain on the opposite side and scurried past the Fine Arts Auditorium. They did not look back. They did not notice Madeleine sitting on the marble ledge. A chill shivered down her spine. It's time to go. With her free hand clasping the cell phone to her right ear and the other hand clutching the walker, Madeleine worked her way up to a standing position, and the wind buffeted her from side to side, and a sudden wave of uneasiness flooded through her. A shiver of terror rippled through her, for she felt unbalanced and uneven, and as she rose to her feet, she had to adjust her body to her change in stature. Her bones creaked, her back hurt, and in the place where her left hip replacement surgery had taken place, and where the knob of the metal implant had been resting on the cold, hard surface of the slate wall, her left buttock throbbed with the ache and the pain of it, and she wished she'd risen to her feet more slowly. But now that she'd adjusted to standing, she thought she'd ease herself down the flagstone steps of the fountain and toward the street, to be ready when her husband returned to collect her. As she prepared to do this, out of the corner of her eye, again, she was drawn irresistibly to it. She saw something shift. She whipped her head around, catching a full blast of Arctic cold against her face. That fish's head really did move. I'm not imagining it. She gazed with intense interest at the fish closest to her and which faced Lady Venus's torso. Had the sculptures in the fountain been outfitted with some kind of animatronic devices to make them move? Theme parks had entire animatronic exhibits of dinosaurs moving and bellowing, and she wondered if someone at the IU physical plant had installed some kind of a device in the fish to make them move, however minutely. Was it some kind of an animatronic device installed at the base of the fish to, she didn't know, pivot the fish's head from time to time, giving the fish the appearance of movement? She stared at the fish closest to her. It spouted water directly onto Lady Venus's smooth belly. But the position of his head had changed, and it now pointed toward her a little. She shook her head with irritation. You're imagining things. Remember, you're loaded up on OxyContin. As if to reassure herself, she spoke. Madeleine, you're a fool. It's the cold. What'd you say? Cassie asked. She glanced back at the fountain. Lady Venus and the fish remained still as stone, just as they ought to be, really. Only now Madeleine wasn't so sure. It's the cold, she said aloud. The cold's playing tricks with my eyes. She sat back down on the stone wall and felt immediately better. The simple act of standing had helped to ease the tension in her back. She leaned back a little to stretch her spine out some more. And as she listened to her friend and drifted her fingers in the cold water, she wondered idly what might happen were she to count up her regrets, then abandoned it, for it was a foolish thought. Why count up regrets when they are as numerous as the pebbles that form the basis of this fountain? She thought of her mother and of all the times when she'd been less than generous, less than loving, less than kind to her. There were innumerable instances of times when she'd been less than to her mother, less than the generous, kind, loving daughter that her mother deserved. She regretted it all. She regretted it all.